Hi, everybody. This is Josh.
Brian.
And Thomas.
Welcome and thanks for joining us for episode 5 of Heritage Cycles podcast. We have a special guest in the shop with us today, our good friend Keith Lugs. He'll be with us talking about a great article he wrote. You put it on Facebook, I guess.
Yeah, I had it kind of in a rougher form on Facebook, and then Yay Bikes asked me to do some editing, and Meredith Joy at Yay Bikes did some more editing and turned it into more of an article.
Okay.
Like with complete sentences.
Gotcha. But yeah, Keith is with us, and we're going to talk about this cool article that he wrote, and we'll post a link to it, I guess.
It'll be a link.
It's about how what is the title of it?
Evaluating a used bicycle.
Evaluating a used bicycle. So it goes through some important tips on how to pick out, and if you're in the market for a used bike, some good tips on how to go about doing so.
Yep. So, welcome, Keith. Thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
Good to be here.
Taking your time out to come down to our little hole-in-the-wall shop. And,
I like the shop.
Do this. Thank you. So, first we got to talk about what we're drinking.
Oh, yeah. We always talk about
first thing.
Yep. So I'm drinking a Rheingeist beer. It was, what is it? Truth. IPA.
Truth.
It's delicious.
I
put it in a. It's not that I can't read. I put it in a glass. That's why I couldn't bring it up, conjure up what it was right away.
Also can't read.
I can't read that.
I'm drinking some Highwire lager from Highwire Brewing in Asheville, North Carolina, and it is delicious because it's a lager. Of course, it's delicious.
I've got the Columbus Brewing Company Bodie IPA. It's a nice, strong, and smooth IPA to get you in the right mood for podcasting.
What you got, Keith?
I've got a North High Brewing Company Final Countdown Double IPA, 9.3 ABV. I'm glad someone pointed that out to me.
So as
the show goes through,
2 or 3 more.
As the show goes on, you'll be able to tell maybe.
That's a new brew though, right? Is that something new from North High?
Yeah, I think just a week or two old, actually.
You got it. You tasted it
at the Winter Warmer Fest up in Cleveland.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then you came back to town, and there it was.
Yep.
Boom.
Beautifully pinked, canned, and all.
Yeah, it does have a lovely pink can. I like it, and it's got kind of like an '80s. What's that movie called?
Tron.
Tron,
kind
right?
of Tron.
The grid on the bottom.
That's cool. All right. So before we dive into the endless abyss that is buying a used bicycle, Keith has been buying, selling, restoring bikes for probably some time now. How long have you been doing that?
Oh man, probably since I was a kid. I mean, a teenager, and it's a lot of the times it's just been a hobby, or to help out a friend who's looking for a bike. And there's been periods where I've done it a lot more intensely. But if I find something that looks really interesting to me, and I figure I can, make it into something nicer or something someone can ride, and the price is right, I'll pick a bike up. I did at the swap meet. In fact, I bought a couple of bikes that I think people thought they were done. Yeah, people thought there's nothing left of these bikes. They sold them really, really cheap, and I think I'll get at least one good bike out of them. So.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah.
So obviously, you wrote this article. What made you want to write such an article?
Well, I started a Facebook group some years ago, and one of the things I've done pretty regularly is look through Craigslist, occasionally eBay, other social media platforms where people sell used bikes. And I'll pick out ones that I think are above average or interesting or unusual, and I will post them there, and I'll usually put like a paragraph with it. I'll either, because I know something about the brand or the particular model, or I'll do a little research into it. And I try to, make sure they're good quality bikes. I mean, something that someone in the group would be happy with. Mm. And, there's probably a couple hundred people in that group.
Yeah, I think.
And I was mentioning earlier that people don't often say anything about it within the group, but it's not unusual for me to run into someone and they'll say, "Hey, I got that bike that you posted."
It was a secret until
bike
now.
Of the day. Yeah, exactly. and I really like it, or a friend got it and they really liked it. So
yeah. What's that Facebook?
Cycling for Fun.
Cycling for Fun.
And so I kind of came up with this article it just ended up being something I wrote as a sticky on the Facebook page or a pinned post, so that it went through the basics. And I tried to do it, as you see, systematically. Where, well, first of all, if you can support a local bike shop and buy a new bike, I mean, by all means, do it.
Right.
Sure.
And people, I work at a bike shop. I work at Ride Home Cyclery in Worthington, and I'll have neighbors say, I don't want to buy a bike for my kid. I mean, that's like, a few $100s, except that those same people don't bat an eye at buying a gaming system for the same price.
That never
Not
leaves
mentioning the games, and those are done in 2 years, and
Right.
they're I don't know that it's quite as healthy as riding a bike.
And the bad thing about that is that when they go buy a cheap bike from a box store, then they're going to end up spending the same amount of money on it in the long run anyway, with repairs and whatnot. So
I completely agree with that, and in fact, I mentioned that in here is to avoid anything that's sold at a big box store.
Yeah,
And
sure.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
You
yeah.
guys, okay, we'll get to
No,
that
you
later.
can go ahead, but yeah, we'll talk about that.
I mean, speaking as someone who wrenches at a bike shop, I mean, they're the bane of a mechanic's existence because there's just so many things wrong with them, and they're put together wrong. But even if they're put together right, the components and the
Right.
designs, they're just so crappy.
Our last episode, we had an example Josh ran into. They put the entire stem on backwards as well as the
I've seen
levers
it.
on the.
I've seen it. I mean, I've seen amazing things.
It's good. I mean,
That-
you can talk about it all you want and say this is bad and this sucks, but when you walk into one and you see
Right.
it, and
Right.
something not normally as blatant as the stem being on backwards, but
Right.
and someone who knows something about bikes, you can walk into any bike store probably any time and pick out something wrong or dangerous on pretty much any bike in there.
Yeah.
yeah, in a big box store.
Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely. And the problem with that is they're not safe. And I think they turn kids and adults when adults buy them, they turn them off cycling
Yeah.
because, if it
Yep.
doesn't work after your first ride or during the first
And they're
ride,
discouraged.
right. They get discouraged.
Stuff squeaking and
They
loose.
bring it into a bike shop, and it's going to be, however much
Right.
it's
We try to turn them
cost
away.
of the bike is the labor.
Yeah.
Go
It's totaled at that point, basically.
Yeah, we had a couple in today that we finished today, and I tried to talk the guy out of getting them repaired. I said that
Yeah.
the cost of the repair is going to exceed the value of these bikes. Are you sure you want to go through with
Right.
it? And he's like, well, yeah, I already picked them up. And then, I mean, all it was a couple broken levers and a couple adjustments on each of them. But still, it's like,
it's a lot. I had that not long ago. A grandfather went to a big box store and bought 3 grandchildren new bikes. And one of the first things that happened was one of the kids, just tipped the bike over, and they were plastic brake levers. Not just any plastic. I mean, it was the kind of plastic that I don't know how to describe it other than it was so cheap. How could you possibly
Yeah.
think
Brittle,
about making a brake lever
right.
out of it? So, but the flip side is, or what the article is, an alternative to that, if you don't have the money to buy a new bike at a bike store,
Which is
or
fine.
you want
right?
an extra bike and you've already bought one at a local bike store, there are just jillions of older bikes that
Sure.
are good quality, and
Treasure
the
troves.
article, right? The article goes through.
And some people don't know what they got too, which is always a good find.
That's,
That's what
Every
Keith
once in a
specializes in.
Aw.
Well, you never know. I mean, you might find a barn full of 1986 Bridgestones
That would never happen in a million years.
that are in perfect condition that someone's just like, get these out of my barn,
Yeah.
and you find gems out there for sure. And there's so many bikes out there that people bought, maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago that
right.
they rode for a little bit and then they stuck it in their garage or basement and they're in perfect condition aside from a few, little aesthetic things or, might need new tires or cables or whatever. But, there could be, and there are definitely a lot of really nice used bikes out there that you could get for not a lot of money.
Josh, you said something that rings true to me is a good bicycle from that era, or even a new good bicycle, you properly care for it and you service it regularly, you don't abuse it, it can last a lifetime.
Oh, for sure.
And the Bridgestones that you found, another good example. I mean, they're bikes from the early 1990s.
80s. These are the 86, 85.
86, 85. I mean, they were well made and, again, properly taken care of, last you the rest of your life. I mean,
Right.
you'll replace tires, you'll replace chains, but the basic bike will keep going.
We'll get into the article right now. So first off, you point out in the article a little safety tip here, which is always good. And everyone's on Craigslist, so anyone who buys anything on Craigslist, don't go alone. If you don't have to, take a friend, a boyfriend, or a girlfriend, or your mom's friend, or your sister's friend, anybody.
Great grandma Gertrude.
She would love to go.
She would.
And
Aunt Gina.
and Aunt Gina can come too. And also be aware of stolen bicycles. If you look up the value of the bicycle and it was $5,000 brand new, it looks brand new, and they're asking $300 or $400 for it, it was probably stolen.
Could be. Maybe not.
But
it's suspect
yes.
for sure.
And then there's websites for that, such as Bikes. Was it Bike Snoop or something?
Well, that's a local Facebook page.
Yeah, that's a Facebook page. There's Bike Index.
Bike Index.
Which you can register your bikes, and if they're stolen and they're registered, they send out alerts. And,
okay.
And your area might have Bike Snoops too. I mean, that's just ours here in Columbus, I guess. But you could
also ask for serial numbers, and run it through your local police station, because we buy bikes.
Lots.
We buy and sell used bikes here in this shop. Not all shops do that, but
as an alternative to Craigslist, and it might even be a better alternative for a lot of people, are local bike shops that sell used bikes. The local co-ops all have used bikes that have been gone over pretty carefully.
Co-ops are great. I always try to guide people to co-ops.
So Franklinton Cycle Works, if you're local, Third Hand.
A quick Google, it would we'll pull out anything local to you. Just what would your magic term? You'd be just bicycle co-op.
Bicycle co-op.
Yeah.
And or followed by your city.
Or used bicycles. Yeah. I think we might come up as used bicycle shop if you Google it. I'm not sure.
So at the end, so you've done that. You've maybe looked around and haven't found anything else, or you just straight up want to go to Craigslist, or I don't know. Even if you go to a bike swap or something like that, this is still good stuff to know.
Or hearsay, somebody that knows somebody that has a bike for sale, or whatever.
Yeah.
So in the article, he points out 6 main areas.
That you
consideration. Being frame set, wheels, drivetrain, brake system, the brand, and the fit or the size of the bicycle. We'll start at the top of the list here, and what should one be looking for in a frame set? What's your tips on that there?
Well, one thing you do is you'll sight down the tubes to see that they're straight. Stand over the bike with it centered under you, and look up and down the bike to see if the fork is going out one direction to the side. The head tube, which is the tube at the front of the bike, it's usually kind of short, maybe a few inches. And then there's the seat tube that the seat post goes into. Those tubes should be parallel, and if one of them, if you sight down them and they don't appear to be parallel, then that's an alignment problem.
Is that fixable, or is that just a trash?
Well, it depends on how bad it is. If it's a bicycle made out of steel, then definitely you can have someone align the tubes or align the frame. But then that's an expense.
Right.
Do you want to,
if you're on a budget anyway, that might be another $100 or $200.
Right. You can just pass it by, because in some disassemblies is required to do some frame alignment.
And if you're buying used and just getting into it, that's probably maybe a little bigger than bite than you want to bite off.
That's the thing. I think there are so many good used bikes out there. As long as you can take your time, if there is something significantly wrong or you're just not sure, just pass it by. Because there are lots of good ones out there.
For sure.
So you don't need to settle for one that has a frame that's out of alignment. But, sighting down the tubes, looking for cracks and dents. One place that I often find either a dent or a crumpling is right where the down tube of the frame joins the head tube. If there's been a front end collision, there'll often be either a little crease or a little bump.
Yeah.
And that's because someone, wasn't looking and hit a car or a wall or something.
Head-on collision.
And
yeah.
sometimes the fork will be bent back if you sight down the head tube and you see that the fork tubes are going inward toward the bike. Then that's more evidence of that.
Yeah.
Sure, you might be able to straighten the fork, and maybe that bump isn't a problem. I mean, if it's too bad, it could be the frame could be weakened. But it's something you could say, well, you pass it by. Cracks, you don't want to mess with a frame that's cracked. Again, gee, you could have it repaired, but if you're trying to get a bike for $100 to $250, $300, or $350, do you want to have to pay someone to repair the frame?
Right.
And say,
Yeah,
no.
if you're looking for a restore, you probably already know all these things. So
yeah,
if you're up for handling or taking a bike frame to get repaired,
right,
you probably know your way around a bike
right,
already.
and that would be, and the bike that would be worth it would be a very high end
Right.
bike.
Right.
So
you're a collector or something.
exactly.
But another thing I'd like to point out, if something that could grab your attention on a tube bending is there's going to be a little bit of paint
yes,
chipped or peeling or bubbled up right there at that spot.
Yeah, paint will flake off at in those same areas around where the top tube or the down tube joins the head tube. There'll be paint coming off there.
Let me stop you there for a second. So the down tube.
We'll put a diagram. We can put a diagram
Okay,
on the
we'll
YouTube video.
but for those who aren't listening on YouTube, so the down tube is basically the one that's sort of at a 45-degree angle to the ground.
Yeah,
It's
that's
connecting
fair.
the fork to the crank, basically.
Yeah.
So that's the down tube. The head tube is the one that the fork is on.
Good. The steer tube goes through. So
Right.
yeah, what holds where the fork pivots from,
Right.
I guess.
And then you have where the seat goes in. That tube is called
The seat tube.
the seat tube. And then the one that's parallel to the ground, essentially, not
On the top.
On the top is the top tube.
Yep.
Yeah. And then beyond that, past the tubes, the main tubes of the frame is the
seat
skinny,
stays and the chain stays.
Right. The chain stays go perpendicular with the ground or with the chain,
Mm-hmm.
and then the seat stays are going to be a connection from your rear hub to
The seat, basically
The
the one
top of
that's
the seat
at a
tube.
45-degree angle, give or take.
correct
Some degrees,
yeah,
but-
which make up the rear triangle of the frame.
So there you have that. I'll put up a diagram, but for those just listening, now you know all about tubes.
One way, I mean, one thing I say in the article is if you can't test ride the bike, then it's not probably, unless you're really savvy and
Right.
know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, like
Don't
buying
even
on
think
eBay.
about
is
buying it.
Yeah.
Should just
Now,
do that anyway.
Here's
if you
a
are savvy.
frame alignment test that is an okay test if you can ride no-handed. If you can ride the bike you're testing no-handed and not lean from one side to the other, then whatever misalignment it is, the sum of those misalignments is 0, and it's straight enough to be good to go.
The sum of the
That makes sense.
misalignments. Yeah.
Well, you got to be sure that you can do that
Yeah,
in the first place.
Don't try riding no-handed the first
first time.
on the test bike.
If you do
Oh,
have
this
Go
bike
into
is
it.
terrible. I can't do it.
If you go into it, go into the bike already skilled at riding no-handed, then it's an okay test.
and if you're not skilled, then have someone record you so we can laugh at you later. So
Right.
send us the video if
Yes,
you're trying
please.
that. So what about if you're buying a steel bike, what about taking the seat post out and looking down in to where it goes into the frame? Does that help you at all, looking for rust or anything?
I think that, in fact, you need to be able to move the seat post, if
Yeah,
nothing
so
else,
it's
to
not seized.
adjust it
Yeah.
to make sure it's not seized in there. I mean, how many bikes come in here
Yeah.
It's the worst.
chemically welded
Yeah.
That'll
together,
just ruin
and
your week.
so, right, it does. And so, yeah, I think it's worth spotting down there. I think
Yeah.
that's a good idea.
If anything,
I mean,
just give it a wiggle if you're not going to take it out, and just make sure you can move it,
Make sure
because
it
you're going to
moves.
need to adjust it anyway, probably.
right. And the same thing with the stem that holds the part that holds the handlebars into the frame. You should be able to raise and lower that, because to a lesser degree, some of those get seized or chemically welded into place.
Yeah, that's no fun either.
And again, the fact that it's chemically welded in place means there's a fair amount of rust.
So
Right. And to get that free, there's another expense for you.
Right.
So if you're just buying, let's talk material real quick. So if you're just buying a bike, This isn't your second bike. This is you're buying a used bike because you don't want to put too much money into it and not ride it. And you don't know if you're going to ride it. What
Right.
frame material would you recommend? Aluminum, steel, or carbon?
Well,
I like that chuckle.
Mm-hmm.
I like steel frames. I think they last a long time when they're well.
Is it
taken
easier to
care
see
of.
a steel frame? Is it more reliable for someone who doesn't know much about bikes? Is it easier to buy a steel frame and have peace of mind?
There's different grades of steel.
I don't have. Yeah, there's different grades of steel. I don't really have a problem with aluminum bikes. I mean, there are people who say, well, the fatigue, possibility of fatigue is greater than with steel. I don't really have a big problem with them if you look at the other suggestions in this article and it's by a reputable brand.
Yeah.
And I think one that hasn't been abused, they can last a good long time. And of course, aluminum doesn't rust. So if some people prefer that for a dedicated winter bike, for example. But as far as carbon fiber goes, I wouldn't suggest for someone who isn't really into bicycles to buy a used carbon bike unless you're going to race. If you're going to race and weight is everything, go for it. Thing is, I mean, I've seen several come into the shop. The older a carbon bike is, and this isn't just a matter of it aging, I mean, they're better made than they used to be.
Sure.
But we've had them come in with the frame tubes on. I remember discovering that the seat tube on one had completely split off at the bottom. The owner didn't even know. And the place where the bottom bracket joined the down tube was also starting to show a gap. And so this thing was a time bomb.
Yeah.
And this was a major brand frame.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a trusted brand. And the bike, I guess it has some miles on it. And it was probably, a 15-year-old bike. But this bike was done. It was absolutely not safe to ride.
Right.
Yeah.
And if that was a new bike, then that would be covered by a warranty more than likely.
Right.
If that's a used bike, then you can throw that warranty out the window because there's nobody covering that.
The other thing about carbon, if I can just give one more example,
Sure, yeah.
A fairly new bike came in a few months ago. Name brand bike, yes. Okay. Same brand as the other one.
Oh, no. We'll get that brand after the show.
So major manufacturer of carbon bikes, well-known, well-respected. The person got in a wreck. And so they brought it in for us to evaluate whether the bike was still safe to ride.
Mm-hmm.
And
very smart.
The bike, to the credit of this manufacturer, had a sticker on it saying, if this fork has if this bike's been in a wreck, this fork may have sustained damage that you can't see.
Right.
You can't see with the naked eye. There's not going to be necessarily a hairline crack on the outside. There could be fibers damaged on the inside that you're not going to be able to tell.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the bike looked okay, but in the end, I had to say, I don't know.
Go
to the manufacturer. Go to
the
manufacturer and see if they'll replace it or what you need to do, because I can't
some kind
certify.
of scan or something.
I don't have X-ray vision yet. So I couldn't say this bike is safe with a clear conscience. And that's following the manufacturer's instructions. Yeah. And it's funny because just a couple of weeks before that, I had noticed an article, and I don't think it was a new article, about a guy in Australia who had been riding a carbon bike by the same manufacturer, and the steering tube cracked while it was riding, and he died as a result of the accident. Yeah. And so I think that warning sticker might even have been in response to that incident. So I guess that's just a caution. I'm not saying I'm anti-carbon. I mean, if you race,
well, yeah, if you're buying carbon,
a dedicated roadie, and you're a sophisticated buyer, and you're
probably buying bikes very often.
Yeah, this isn't your first bike.
Right. You're getting a new bike every 2 years, or your team sponsor pays for it or something. Knock yourself out. But for the average consumer who isn't riding competitively, I just wouldn't bother.
Right.
Well, that's good for the entry level people to know that carbon is probably not good for your first bike. That was basically my point by throwing it in the ring. Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there's frames for you. Well, next up on the article, or the topics outlined in the article, is wheel set. So I'll let you guys handle that. I don't know nothing about no wheel sets.
Well, it's next to the frame set. It's probably the most expensive area of the bike. I mean, getting a new set of wheels is kind of pricey. Having them trued,
complex.
Yeah, that's right. It's a complex system with all the tangential spokes and everything. So for someone who isn't real familiar with looking at wheels to try to evaluate them, the article suggests that you inspect the rims, obviously, for cracks or dents. One thing that you'll also see, rims wear out. If especially, if you're using rim brakes, the abrasion will eventually wear them out to the point that they'll fail. And before they fail, some of them have wear indicators now, but unless you know what you're looking for, if you feel the sides of the rim where the brake pads hit and it feels concave, in other words, it has a little dip in it all the way around.
Yeah, we'll put a diagram for that too.
Yeah, that's so if there's if it's not a flat surface, then that rim might be at the end of its life.
Right. So what happens is that over time the brake pads wear a little bit of that metal away on the sidewall of the rim, and eventually it'll weaken, get thinner, weaken, and then we had a customer that happened recently. They went on a tour about 100. They're going like a century or something.
Yeah, they were going
AJ
to Yellow Springs.
Yeah, and about halfway there or so, his wheel just split.
Oh, bummer.
Yeah.
End of ride.
Yeah, for sure. I think he was still able to ride
it's a little bit. It's like you carry spare inner tubes. You don't carry spare wheels.
Right, yeah, right. And he didn't even get a flat, he said. It just boom, just popped out. But his rim split, so that's not a functional bike anymore.
This might be something that if someone's selling a bike and they are experienced, they know is happening, and it might be a reason they are selling the bike, hoping someone doesn't notice. So this will be really good to look for because, like Keith said, it's the second most expensive thing on the bike for the most part, depending on
Right, and you're gonna want to pay close attention to the rear wheel.
Yeah, that's more expensive.
Well, and it's going to wear out a lot faster.
That's right. It takes most of the abuse.
Yeah, right.
And so it's going to be the one to go first, typically. The other thing you look for on the rims are cracks. If spoke has been over-tensioned, you might get a crack where the spoke nipple comes out of the rim. There's a little hole there for the spoke nipple to fit into. And, look at each of the spoke nipples to see if there are any cracks. Another thing is, rims don't come out, they're extruded aluminum, and then the circle is joined either by welding or pinning, and that joint, which is directly opposite of the hole that the inner tube valve goes through, where it's joined, take a look at that, because if that is uneven or it looks like there's a gap there, it's not a clean there'll be a line.
Yeah, you can run your finger across it.
Yeah, if you feel a ridge or you can see a gap, that might be a problem as well.
Yep. That's right.
So that's the rim. The other thing is, Josh, you were saying that the wheels are they're complex mechanisms in terms of how they're built, and what they have are tangential spokes, spokes that cross each other and distribute the load very well when everything's set up right, and it's not worn out and hasn't been abused. But what can happen is if the wheel has gone way out of true, it's been bent, there's been an accident, it's just worn out, someone might be able to true that wheel. By true, I mean you spin that wheel, and it doesn't look like there's any play side to side. You spin it, and you see the rim pass by the brake pads, and the distance stays the same between the brake pad and the rim on both sides. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah.
So that's like a cheap. It's not a truing stand, but you see that gap.
I use it as a truing stand all the time.
We do. Yeah, we do too for basic tune-ups at
Sure.
Ride Home.
Yeah.
The basic tune-up, you true it on the bike. The deluxe tune-up, we put it on the stand.
truing stand.
So, even though it's true, that wheel may be trash.
Right.
Right.
And
So
even
what
though
you-
it's not true, it may still be a perfectly good wheel too.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
You might be able to true a wheel. It just may be a loose spoke.
To
That's
some
a
degree,
very good point.
yeah. To some degree, if it's completely just, I don't even know how to what you describe it.
Tacoed.
Yeah, just
the
like
ta-
Wonky.
some wheels cannot be trued back into a straight line. But yeah, if it's
Definitely
just
lost
a little wobbly, and that cheap that service is fairly cheap. That's not really a big deal, and I would
Right.
expect most used bikes out there probably not to have trued wheels.
Well, and that goes to another point. You might want to, talking about a basic tune-up, you might want to just expect to take your bike in for a basic tune-up to a shop if you're going to buy a used bike.
I agree with that. I would add the price of a basic tune-up just for peace of mind and for safety. I mean, people who are trained mechanics are looking for things that if you're not don't have the experience, you might not see. So
Right.
I agree with that. The other thing I suggest doing in inspecting the wheels, and I think it's true, the rear wheel it's even more important because there's more stress on it, is let's say you have a true wheel. Take the spokes and squeeze them and see if there are any that are really loose, and maybe some are really tight. If you have spokes if the wheel is true, but some of the spokes are like way loose and some are really tight, that wheel, even though it's true, might be at the end of its life. Someone's
Right.
had to do, radical things with the spokes
Radical.
to get it to
That's true.
to get it to be true, but it's not a wheel that's sound or is going to
Right.
last.
Or check the nipples. So they should be square, all of your nipples.
Yep. Good point.
Not
I'm
the
gonna
ones
add
on your
that.
body.
I'm gonna-
No,
I'm gonna
those are round.
Ouch. I'm gonna.
But the
Just-
ones
you
on your
twist
bike,
them,
we're
right?
just talking about bikes here.
Those bikes.
Come on, guys.
Come on.
Bring it in. So I don't know why I said bring it in. Like we're gonna hug now. But anyway, yeah. So you want the have nice square sides of all your nipples on your wheels. So if not, then they're rounded. Then that means that somebody's kind of put a little bit extra torque when they were in the process of truing that wheel,
Right.
and that means that maybe those some of those spokes are a little
The other
too tensioned.
Too
absolutely
tensioned.
too much tension here. So the other thing, I talked about, grabbing the spokes and kind of feeling them, but really, giving them a good flick with your fingernail and doing that on both sides. I mean, the drive side where the cassette or freewheel is, the gears that are attached to the wheel, those are going to be higher tension. And so when you give them a ping, it's going to be a higher note, but all those should be about the same note. If you turn the wheel and you flick it, and you're going to hear, the same note, the same
Yeah.
music.
And if they're
the
different
same-
notes, then
It's a
you can
B
play
flat.
That's a problem, right?
And you can play a song though.
You're looking
Yeah.
for a B flat, nothing over a B flat. Okay.
And then on the other side, the same thing. It'll probably be, a lower tone. It will be a lower tone because there's less tension.
Right.
But again, that would be if the wheel's true, but there's like spokes that are way loose or
Right.
really
If
super
they're noticeably
tight.
loose in comparison to the other spokes, then you got
Yeah.
you
But
got
I
bad
think
news.
your point is really good that it's not unusual for a used bike that's just owned by average bike person
Yeah.
owner is going to have a wheel that's going to be a little bit out of true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite often actually. We come across all kinds of, seemingly brand new bikes underneath a coat of dust that that we do tune-ups on, and it's just like you don't know where you're getting into until you start cleaning it off, and you're just like, oh wow, this bike has never been ridden, and the wheels are usually out of true, and the brake cables are a little stretched, and there's still some service that needs to be done, but for the most part, it's a perfectly good bike under all that gunk.
Yeah. Don't let the gunk deter you. That wipes right off.
Yep.
All right. Anyone else? Anyway.
I don't know if I mentioned tires, but
Oh yeah.
it's not unusual on an old bike for tires either to be worn out
Yeah.
or dry rotted.
And that's an easy fix.
And-
Yeah.
So that's another thing that when you take it to your locally owned bike shop
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
a tune-up and you need new tires,
$15 a tire or so.
That's
Right. That's about
that's
what
something you can expect to
our
do.
basic tire. Well, I guess we could mention that. Like, what a basic tune-up for us is around $50, and we just kind of go over the whole bike. And then, if you're going to need tires and tubes, which is most likely if it's a used bike, then you're looking at around $100 altogether for just that kind of service. We're kind of on the lower end of the spectrum, I think.
Yeah, we can
when
just
it comes
speak for
to
ourselves.
service.
This is a ballpark figure.
Right. So you're probably looking at a basic tune-up around like $50 to $80, I would say.
Yeah, that sounds right.
That'll get it going pretty much close to brand new, assuming nothing needs replaced. So yeah, that's just a figure for you guys to think about, that you can just assume, or it would just be smart to take it to your local bike shop to get this thing tuned up.
Right. Make friends with your local bike shop. And that way they can you can have one that's honest with you, and they can say
free advice and all that good stuff.
Hey, this bike is going to need X amount of money to put into it to make it rideable. Or they give you some different plans. I like to do that with people if they have like a real vintage bike and they want to refurbish or something. I'll be like, well, you can put $100 into it and have this. You can put $150 into it and have this. You can have $300 into it and then have a brand new bike. So, find a bike shop that can do something like that.
And if you can't, call Josh.
Yeah.
We'll fly you out
614-992 bike.
Next up is drivetrain. Now, I think this is going to be
complex.
Yeah. Basically, you check to see if it's loose or not. I mean, what else?
Well, you're thinking of just cranks,
right?
So, drivetrain consists of your crank, chain rings, chain, cogs of your cassette or freewheel.
Right. So,
cables
and explaining the drivetrain to someone just looking at a bike, just keep in mind that these people probably don't know a lot of these terms.
Sure.
So where do you start?
I'd describe the drivetrain as everything that makes the bike move forward and change gears. So the pedals, the crankset, the bottom bracket, axle, all these things.
The bottom brackets,
the derailleurs, the chain. So right, and how do we could describe each one of those things, or
briefly,
use a chart?
I guess.
Well, yeah.
I mean, people know what a chain is.
Yeah, the bottom bracket though, I think is one might not be as obvious to people.
Right.
Because when you think of a bracket, you think
dark in there.
You think of something hanging off the bike.
You have to take things off
it's
before
inside.
You can even take it apart.
Right.
Yeah. So when you're pedaling, the thing that's holding the crank arms, in between the crank arms, is your bottom bracket, basically.
Right. Yeah, sure. That's good.
Yeah. But some of the stuff is right out there where you can see it. The derailleurs are right out there where you can see them. They're exposed mechanisms. And really, it seems complicated, but compared to a lot of mechanical devices, they're actually kind of crude.
Yeah,
that's true.
I mean, you've got cables,
simple machines,
pulling things to move them. That's it.
Yeah. Right.
And
but they're finicky little bitches.
They can be finicky little bitches, and because tolerances are close, and a little bit of movement makes a big difference.
Yeah, or a little bit of
while they're simple,
corrosion
they're precision mechanisms, and they have to be adjusted with skill.
Right. Unless you got friction, then you're all good.
Friction's good.
That's for another podcast.
That's true.
So I say in the article, everything should shift smoothly.
Yeah.
Okay, so you ride the bike, you're test riding, go through the gears. If everything works, your drivetrain is probably okay. When I think of problems I see at the shop, okay, if you shift to the largest gear in the back and it doesn't get caught in the spokes, yay!
Right.
Yeah, make sure.
Yeah, don't be going 20 miles an hour while you just test that.
And if everything does work correctly, just keep going, and you got yourself a free bike.
But, I say, cables, it seems like older bikes, cables are frayed at the end.
Yeah.
That's not a huge deal.
Yeah, cables are cheap.
If cables are easy to replace and not too expensive to replace, you add that to a tune-up, or maybe a deluxe tune-up might include new cables.
Sure.
When you go to take your bike to the bike shop for a tune-up, I mean, they will get it so that it's more finely tuned and properly adjusted. But when you test ride it, if you're able to shift through all the gears, I think the drivetrain, at least the derailleur part of the drivetrain, is okay. One thing I say in the article is that replacement of a chain is almost a given.
Sure.
I mean, starting out, really, I don't know, if you ride much, I might put a new chain on a bike every year.
Sure.
Or even more than once a year, because they wear out.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not a bad idea.
That's when you have multiple bikes. So
Yeah.
it really just depends on how much you clean it, which we've gone over.
Yep, we
in
talked
other
about chain care
episodes. But how often you're riding and.
But if the chain is dirty and rusty on a bike that otherwise looks great, I mean, chains aren't super expensive
sure.
10,
to
15
either
bucks.
buy or to install.
Right.
So don't hesitate to have the chain replaced. So you're starting with a fresh one.
Right.
But it might be good too. I mean, you take it to the bike shop, they're going to have a chain checker to see whether the chain is too worn out to continue to use.
And even a little bit of surface rust isn't that bad. Like, Brian pointed out on a bike that we brought in for repair today, it was a little bit rusty. He's just like, oh, that needs a new chain. And I was just like, well, not necessarily. We can clean that up and lube it up pretty good, and it's probably going to be okay. But yeah, chain stretch, you definitely want to change that. But
so I guess then if you just want to look for if the chain doesn't hold, if you held it up, it wouldn't stick straight out, kind of thing.
Sure, yeah. Which we've also had today.
If everything works when you're test riding,
then
I think you're probably okay. I think the point was don't turn down a bike because the chain is dirty or somewhat rusty.
That might actually turn into your benefit because you can kind of haggle a little bit with
man,
the seller.
It's like,
oh, come on, man! Look at that chain.
$200. Don't do that.
It's got one of those quick what
disconnects.
Quick disconnects.
One of those quick disconnects on it. That's
we should, safety. That's not within the scope of this, but
right.
How many bikes do you see where someone has tried to just tighten the
quick
release just by spinning it and not using the cam lever?
Yeah. All the time.
Yeah. So anyway, but we won't go into that.
That'll be another episode.
Yeah, you'll find that at the big boxers.
The one thing I put is the crank set is actually sometimes a little bit expensive to replace. So you want to check that out. I suggest, you should be able to sight down on the chain ring while you're turning it, and the chain rings should spin true. In other words, they're not wobbling from one side to another as you spin the crank arms. And it could be one of two things. I mean, it could just be the chain rings are bent. Chain rings aren't too difficult to true. But it could be that one of the crank arm, that one of the spiders on the crank that holds the chain ring, one of those is bent.
Most definitely.
Or the crank arm itself is bent. And as I said,
or the
those
bottom
could be
bracket is bent.
Or the bottom bracket axle is bent. And those things are maybe getting a little more pricey, and all of those could be fixed. But do you want to add that to the cost of buying the bike?
Sure, and you could just spin the cranks backwards if you're standing there looking at the bike. Just kind of spin the pedals backwards and utilize the freewheel there, and just kind of eyeball and make sure the teeth of the chain rings are somewhat true. I mean, you want them maybe a millimeter or so of.
Millimeter might be okay.
Might be okay. That's not great, but
true.
You want them straight as possible.
Straight.
But if it's a millimeter, you might be able to.
And when you test ride the bike, one thing you might be able to tell is, I mean, if one of the pedals seems to be coming up, you'll feel it. It's just like this weird, funny
it just
feeling.
Feels weird.
It could be that the pedal is cross-threaded into the crank arm, which is kind of bad. Yes, you might be able to retap that, maybe not. Mm-hmm. And so that could be a problem. Or the crank arm itself might be bent. Replacing a crank is not as expensive as a new set of wheels, but it just might not be something you want to add to the cost.
Right, exactly. Yep, that's the point.
Yeah, it might be just the left crank arm though, and that
cheap.
might be pretty easy to swap out. $20 or something like
that.
Yeah,
and your bike shop would be able to get those parts. They're not as expensive as buying a frame set or a set of wheels. I guess another thing is with drivetrain parts, derailleurs and so on. If you're getting a bike that's older and has friction shift, all of the co-ops in town, and I'm sure co-ops all over the world, will have huge bins of old derailleurs and shifters that they've taken off bikes, and you can get those for next to nothing.
Sure, they're not even that expensive new.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
With a 7-8 speed derailleur, we sell them. At $15-$20.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that's it for drivetrains. Next up on the agenda is brakes. What do I need to know about buying used brakes?
Well, hopefully they're connected to your bicycle that you're buying used.
That's the first thing you check.
Yeah.
If they're in a box, then you know You're doing Flintstone.
So the brakes should work and make the bike stop.
Should they squeal?
That's an interesting point. There's a lot of different things make brakes squeal, and brakes squealing it isn't necessarily a problem.
No.
I mean, it's harmonic vibration. Sometimes you can get rid of that just by cleaning the rims and the brake pads. Sometimes if that doesn't work, you tow the brake pads in. Usually that takes care of it.
Yep.
Just a minor adjustment.
Yep.
Sometimes.
Right. So squealing brakes, not the end of the world. One thing, I say in the article, if the brakes work, you're in good shape for the most part. And then there's some details to that. But before you test ride the bike, walk along with the bike, squeeze the levers, and make sure the brakes work that way, that they're engaging before you get on and do the test ride.
That's smart. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to add that to the article.
Yeah, I like that.
Because you don't want to have the test of the brakes be while you're moving already. Maybe someone hasn't, it's a V brake and they haven't reconnected the noodle to the other brake arm, and so the brake's on there, but it's not going to engage and stop the bike. So test the brakes before you do the test.
Squeeze both brakes and then try to shove the bike, basically.
And check your
exactly.
noodle.
Check the noodle.
Check
Ding
the
dang
noodle.
noodles.
Yeah.
Yes.
Noodles.
We're not joking here when we talk about nipples and noodles.
Yes.
These are actually bike parts.
So the noodle is the metal elbow, basically.
Yeah. On kids' bike, kids like to get them caught on things.
Yeah.
And rip them out.
Maybe I'll put up a picture of Josh's noodle right here.
Oh yeah.
What about my noodle?
That'll please.
So the only fine points to this, if you want to call it, are that the brakes engage when you release the brake levers. Do the brake arms separate again, and the brakes pads they disengage, and the brake pads aren't dragging on the rim. If they don't disengage, then you've got a problem. It could be a spring isn't clipped in right. That can happen on V brakes. The spring that causes the tension away from
that happens quite often, actually. That happens on brand new department store bikes very often.
Makes you want to go in department stores with zip ties and zip tie them all down. But broken springs or springs that aren't working, that could be a problem with the brakes. But that's another thing, like the drivetrain. I mean, brakes aren't super expensive to replace typically, so it's not necessarily the end of the world.
You're not going to need to replace them more times than not. You're just going to need an adjustment.
And they're pretty simple mechanisms.
The adjustment will be included in the tune-up that you get. So unless they got to replace the pads, which are very, very cheap, that's just something else that if they are a little soft, you can push it a little bit, or they don't disengage all the way. That's going to be covered in the tune-up that you're going to go get at your local bike shop in the first place.
And worst case scenario, you have to replace the brake caliper or the cantilevers or whatever, and it's gonna it's not a huge expense.
So brakes aren't really there isn't much that can go on that could be a big deal breaker.
Right, I don't think it's a deal breaker, and in fact, let's say you've got a 1970s bike that has side pull brakes. Well, I mean, a good upgrade would be dual pivots. I mean, there are generally better stoppers, a decent quality dual pivot. So it might be an opportunity. You get the price lower because the brakes are wonky, they're bent, they're broken, they're cracked, they don't operate at all. You might be able to do an upgrade that would be, make it a safer, easier bike to maintain. And brake pads wear. I mean, that's another thing. I mean, the fact that the brake pads are worn or very worn.
Right.
That's something that, like tires, they need replaced periodically. So
even more so. I just noticed I needed some on my bike today, and I don't even know.
So here's a question.
I don't know how many miles I have on it, but it's probably like 6 months worth.
Yeah.
It was like, I need brake pads already. So, but that's definitely not a big expense.
So if you notice that the brake pads are worn, if you have an eye for that, you can tell that they're worn down. Does that necessarily mean that the rim is bad? Or so you will go through several brake pads before you'll wear down your rim?
Good point.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd say at least 2 to 3, I guess, before. I mean, depending on your brake pads.
And depends.
It depends on your rim, too.
And if you're riding year-round, I think
Yeah.
If you're
Salt.
riding a bike year round, the salt, I swear they're putting something in there besides just salt.
It's
Maybe
brake
just-
ruiner.
It's brake ruiner or rim
Bike
wear
ruiner.
compound.
Bike
Rim,
ruiner.
rim wear compound, and it'll wear down your rims and the pads and everything more quickly.
Yep.
But the upgrading brake pads. I mean, I kind of like the cool stop pads, the salmon colored
I
ones.
love
think
them.
and so they stop better. They're
swear,
easier
dude.
on your rims. I know.
Me and you are on the same.
Same wavelength. Same wavelength.
Geeking out.
Same
Aren't
bike
we?
path.
Cool stops.
Very much so.
So that's it for brakes.
All right.
We'll
Yep.
Brakes
stop.
are
Make
done.
sure they
there.
stop you,
Yeah.
man.
And if
on
they
the
don't,
brakes.
we will make sure for you.
If they don't stop,
So
just keep on going.
I can see this one being a little tricky a brand
I
because
thought so too.
that's a lot of people and I'm guilty of this. My first like real modern kind of road bike or bike that I really loved was
Adult bike.
was a Trek 1.2 and I loved it so much I thought, well, I can only ever have a Trek from now on.
No.
Oh, brand
Right.
loyalty or
Yeah.
brand fanaticism.
Or your buddy rides a Giant and he says you have to buy a Giant because that's the only bike.
That we get that a lot.
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, that might be, that might be a little off topic, but that's just that. Don't listen to the people.
Yeah, I agree with
Well,
don't
do, though.
listen.
Right.
Every major brand makes good bikes,
Yes,
and quite
that's the
frankly, a lot
point.
of them are made by Giant
If
Right.
in
In
Taiwan.
the same factory.
in the same
Yep.
factory, just to maybe different specs and different dimensions. So the quality is pretty equivalent on all the major brands,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Any bike shop.
that's my
Bike.
call 2 or 3 bike shops,
Right.
see what brands they say,
Or just look on their website.
yeah, or whatever. How do you have to do? How do you have to find out what your local bike shop sells? Those are going to be good bikes.
That's
for
a
the most
good one.
part.
And conversely, go to a big box
Yes.
website
Right.
and look at their brands, and I named some of them in the article.
Yeah.
Those brands are to be avoided at all costs.
Sure.
I mean, seriously, I would not give away one of these bikes.
And
Oh,
the ones
I-
that used to be really good, like you can still buy a really good Schwinn, but most likely you're not going to.
That's there
There
is
is-
and you
sketchy
won't
territory.
and you won't know which one to not buy.
Right. If you're a novice,
Right.
That's
all this.
absolutely true. They've got two different lines of bikes. One line is sold in bike shops, and the other at big box stores.
Yep.
And
Right. And that's
woe to you if you buy the
Yeah.
one from the big box
It's,
store.
yeah, it is
Well,
tough.
they were hounding us for a while to become a dealer, weren't they?
Right.
Schwinn owns GT,
GT, yeah.
and then they were calling us over and over, and we're just like, I'm sorry, we just can't associate any of our brands with big box store brands. Like
Even though
that's the end of the story.
like
I don't
GT
care how
sells-
good your bikes
Yeah,
are.
GT sells some good bikes,
Right.
but you can't. I mean, you can't. It's going to be hard to differentiate which one's nice and which one's not if you don't know.
Right.
Really a lot more detail of what we're talking about to look for, and just an overall good quality bike rather than just if it's failing or not.
Right.
Basically,
Well, yeah.
So,
look to your bike shops for the for the knowledge. I guess it keeps coming back to that.
yes. Is that what you had in your article? What else
I
were we
actually
missing?
name brands
Yeah,
in
sure.
the article. Ones to avoid: Pacific, Magna, Kent, Mongoose, Huffy, Columbia, and any other brand that's sold at a big box store.
Right.
Mm.
Or Amazon. If you can look it up on Amazon and they have it on Amazon, then you probably don't want it. But
You can get Raleigh on it.
Yeah, it's hard to say. That's why I didn't go there. It's hard to say that right now.
that is hard to say. But that's the way it's going.
But if you I don't know if you want to digress to that, but if you buy a bike online, you better add the price of
Assembly.
assembly by a professional mechanic, because we've all seen the aftermath of people who
Try it themselves.
Try
The
it
DIY
and
first
mess up.
timers.
Yeah, and especially the cross-threading the left
Oh,
pedal.
The bike right behind me tells you how not to do that.
Yeah.
all right on the box.
Thanks.
But
Solano.
yeah, but it sounds like a broken record. But a bike, people I think kind of take them a little lighter than they should be. That's you can get hurt really bad on one, and we say over and over, take it to a bike shop, take it to a bike shop. It has nothing to do with money or getting you into the bike shop. It really has a lot to do with we want you to ride your bike, we want you to enjoy riding your bike, and we want you to live and ride your bike and not hurt yourself.
Right. We see the benefits of cycling, and we want to share that with other
Right.
people. That's the bottom line. And that's if you're not going to enjoy it for whatever reason, then
It's not going to be because it's not a good
Right.
bike, right? Or
And-
it's or maintenance problem or a
right. Those are silly reasons to
yeah,
not ride a
there
bike.
you go.
Right. It's a good investment. I mean, as far as, having your bike set up and maintained by a skilled mechanic. I mean, you're out on the road with these things. You want them to be safe. And I agree with what you both just said about we want people to ride bicycles, to enjoy cycling. Cycling is fun. I mean, think about the first time you ever rode a bicycle.
Yes.
What a thrill that is.
Yeah.
You can rediscover that.
Yep.
And
Same, same thing.
there's health benefits.
We went over that.
You can save you
already.
money.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
You
like
age
such a winner.
better.
You make friends.
You do.
You can find
the
a
health
spouse.
There you go.
You can ride your bike naked with your spouse.
You sure can. Or without your spouse.
Or without your spouse. Get her permission though, or his or her permission.
So those, so I mentioned some brands.
Yeah, just do a little bit of research and see who's selling what, and don't buy what Target is selling.
But the brands that bike shops sell, those are good. And I would, there are some brands that are vintage that aren't sold at
That's a tough one
so
too.
things like Univega.
We got one of those. That's good.
It's not a new one though, is it?
No,
of course. So, but
I was just going to point them out.
Yeah.
Point out the ones that you mentioned.
There you go.
I was going to see
Fuji,
if we have them.
which, the shop where I work, we carry the new Fujis. Fujis on back to the 70s were well-made bicycles.
Yeah, we're a Fuji dealer, too.
Panasonic, Bridgestone.
We have one of those. We have lots of those.
Bridgestones. Those were excellent bicycles. Miata
Don't
was
have
a
any
good
Miatas.
Japanese brand. Nishiki,
Those are good.
Univega, Trek, Giant, Specialized, and you could go on.
What about Ross?
Ross is a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Mixed bag. I'll have to go. We could get into the nickname thing. The Ross bikes, in my opinion, that are worth looking at have lugged construction. The frame is fit together with these sleeved joints that are called lugs, and the lugged Rosses are good. The other ones that aren't lugged are just kind of your average huffy quality gas pipe bikes.
Well, and some of the Bridgestones even have some of those gas pipe bikes that have high tensile steel. I mean, they're not terrible. I mean, don't get me wrong. They're still decent. Don't.
I will not.
Okay.
So-
Get me right.
All right.
Yeah,
Peugeot's
Peugeot
good.
were,
On the walls.
Raleigh and Peugeot, and, there were Gitan, there were Italian brands like Batecchia and Itala. Those are good. I think the one thing about the 70s bikes is, if they're maintained and you have a good relationship with your bike shop, that's fine. They're maybe a little harder for the novice to work on if you're going to try to work on themselves.
Center
Things
pull
like
brakes.
Center pull brakes,
Oh.
cothered cranks. If you have to service a
Yep.
cothered crank, that's not something.
I
even
hate
What,
some
what do you
bike
call
shop
those
mechanics-
brake levers? How do you explain them?
From the flats, the
Yeah,
tops
from the
of
top
the
of the-
drop bars.
Yeah.
Then they have the turkey wings. They're kind of like extra levers.
Yeah.
That
Two
would be
levers.
a sign of a mid-range or lower bike. I mean,
Correct.
top-end racing bikes and top-end touring bikes usually didn't have
Right.
those.
Or foam covered drop bars.
Oh, yeah, foam on the drop bars. So,
Or the shifters on the stem. As
right,
opposed
stem
to the down
shifters are usually mid-range or lower in some low-end bikes. So,
Right.
I'm not sure. I've seen that. I guess.
You've
stem
seen it.
shifters.
You've
I
seen
bet
it
if
on
we
like
look,
old Schwinn, like old.
an old Schwinn Varsity from the 70s. I think you go to a certain point and they were down tube shifters, but they would be, in fact, really large, long, heavy chrome shifters
Right.
on the stem.
Yeah.
On the
Oh, yeah,
stem,
yeah,
so
yeah,
you
yeah.
can just reach
really
right over.
long.
Yeah.
I'll bring one in for you next week.
I mean, don't drop it on your foot.
All right, guys.
So those, and then the mixed bags we mentioned. I mean, Schwinn made. I mean, the lugged steel Schwinns were made in Japan and Taiwan, or the Paramount was made in Chicago or Waterford, Wisconsin. I mean, if you find a used Schwinn Paramount for a good price, yes, buy
can
it.
you
I'll buy it
assume
from you.
any USA bike is good?
What's that one? Is that a Paramount?
Oh,
Or a
any
Prelude.
used old
No, any
US bike?
Yeah, any old used
No,
made in USA
definitely
bike.
not.
You can't assume that.
Definitely not. There are, as you said, the ones that are made with gas pipe.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
And
There's
really-
a Huffy over there. That's
And I'd have to say the old Schwinns, I think, were good quality. They spec'd them better than the other American manufacturers. They were heavy. I mean, they were electroforged like 1020 seamed steel, and they'd weigh 40 pounds.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, those things, people are still riding them.
Sure.
I mean, I tell people, when we're all gone, the giant cockroaches will be riding around on these old electroforged Schwinns.
Yeah. That's
thousands
a t-shirt.
of years from now.
Well, they were they were like lifetime warranty, and if you drove over them with your Buick, then it's still covered.
It would hurt your Buick.
Right.
Your Model T.
So those would be like, the Varsity, the Continental, the Collegiate, the Suburban, and they're heavy, but if all you're going to do, and I guess that goes to, what are you going to do with your bike? If you're doing, around your neighborhood and errands up to 5 miles or a short commute, maybe that's fine for you. Sure. And they'll last a long time. They're well made. My wife had a Schwinn Suburban. I mean, this thing was like, it hurt my back, and that's why we ended up getting rid of it, is because I'm like, I'm not lifting this onto the bike rack anymore. Seriously.
Sure.
She loved it, and she went
on
rides.
Name.
Yeah, she went on rides up to 50 miles on that bike.
Oh, really?
And was fine. Now, granted, that was usually on rail to trails, so it was, relatively flat.
Yeah.
But
just cruising along. They were okay. Free Spirit was, I think that was the Sears brand, but that's the same mixed bag where there are gas pipe 10 speeds and 3 speeds, but then there are ones that are lugged that were made by, I think it's pronounced Pooch. Yeah.
Austral Daimler.
Puck.
Same.
You get different kind of pronunciations from.
Anyway, it's
PUCH.
But those were actually made in Austria, and they're on par with other European brands, and generally really good quality.
Yeah, one of my first bikes was a Puch. It was a Odyssey, and somebody had converted to a single speed fixed gear, and I love that bike a lot.
The next thing in the article, I think we already covered. I mean, the older bikes from the 70s that are Italian and British and French, they're really good bikes, but I guess I would just say that they're just slightly fussier in terms of if you're going to work on them yourself. Also, some of them have the plastic simplex derailleurs. I mean, if you take care of them and you're reasonable, you're not crashing your bike, they actually can hold up. I mean, I've had some old bikes that have been pretty well used, and the simplex derailleurs still work fine, but they don't take a lot of abuse because they're made mostly with plastic.
Yeah. They can be finicky for sure.
And so I think once you get past the mid 70s, and a lot of the bikes were made in Japan and then Taiwan with Suntour and Shimano components, I think, and collarless cranks, I think those might be a better bet for some people. They don't have the European bike vibe that's kind of cool with some people, but as a practical matter, they're probably better bikes.
So that'd be a good little rule of thumb if you can find a bike with a little made in Japan or Taiwan sticker, then it's more than likely a pretty decent bike.
One last thing, and I'd love to hear your guys' views on pricing used bikes. Mm-hmm. I tell people to look at completed eBay auctions.
Sure.
Yeah, not what they're selling.
Not what they're even the buy it now prices. You can see people listing the same stuff over and over again for a year,
right?
And it doesn't sell,
right?
Or anyway, so
that's a good source.
At completed auctions
for sure. How do you feel about the Blue Book?
I'll tell you what, I think
it's great for
it's
buyers.
An algorithm. Yeah, it's great for buyers. I think it's a bike industry tool, honestly.
I agree.
To talk people into getting rid of their bike and upgrading.
I agree.
Your bike isn't worth fixing.
Or to devalue.
Right. And I see bikes in there. Look, a rideable bike that's functioning and is high quality, and they're saying it's worth $30.
Here's what you take away. Real. What you take away from Blue Book is the Bicycle Blue Book is the original MSRP. That's really the only and they cut it in half. Specs. Well, it depends. The specs and what it looked like when it was new. You can tell what year it is by matching up the colors.
But people use that
like
as leverage when you're trying to sell a bike.
Yeah, I've run into that where I just had to say, look, I've been looking at used bikes. I know what they're worth. I know what they sell for on eBay, and this.
It's inaccurate.
Blue Book, it is, and I wonder how they come up with it. Is it just
it's got to be an algorithm?
It's an algorithm.
It's just a percentage.
And I wonder also, right? And I think here's where I think that's probably off. Look, how long does a car last? No matter how well you take care of it, unless you're like into vintage restoring,
right?
Sure.
I mean, you get 15 years out of a car, maybe max. And then you can't get parts for it. Bikes are completely different. If you have a good quality bike that you've taken decent care of, haven't abused, you have it maintained, it can last the rest of your life.
Sure.
And it can even be passed on. So you have a bike can last 50 years. I have 2 bicycles that are more than 45 years old. I'm the original owner. And one of them I've put tons of miles on. I mean, tens of thousands of miles.
What are those bikes, by the way?
I have a 1973 Mercian Professional.
Okay.
That I've owned since 1973. And it has a fair number of miles. I mean, it was my main bike for years and years.
Blue Book says it's worth $7.
Yeah, I know, exactly. and then I also have a Peugeot track bike that doesn't have a lot of miles on it, but it has a lot of sentimental value.
Sure. That's just a cool bike, I'm sure.
Yeah, they're keepers. But I think, it sounds like you're in agreement. It must be an algorithm, and in my opinion, if it's an algorithm, it's based on incorrect assumptions, or they're trying to tag along with the kind of algorithms used for cars, and it simply doesn't apply.
With cars, you can put in a condition and mileage. That'll give you, whatever, some kind of generic overview. But it's just like, okay, this bike is 10 years old, so now it is definitely only worth this amount. So yeah, you can't really use that. Probably if you're paying what it says, then you're getting a good deal because it's really really low.
So
really low.
It's beneficial to buyers.
Low.
Bicycle,
so
just Google bicycle Blue
sellers.
Book and you can find it on there and take a look at least what it says. It might help you.
I think sometimes they show specs, which can be helpful, but you can get specs other places too. I mean, there's catalogs. That's another thing. If you want to research, I think it's good to do a little research. If you've seen something on Craigslist, I mean, find out about it. There's places on the internet you can just Google the Google search the brand, look at the catalogs.
Check out Sheldon Brown.
Check him out.
Saint Sheldon.
Yeah, if you're looking at any kind of bicycle research, you're probably going to end up on a Sheldon Brown website and start looking at some technical details about something.
He's a good dude.
Yeah, he was.
Rest in peace.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So what do we think? We think we're ready for fit?
Fit. Yeah.
So the last thing on the article here to wrap this up is fit, which is this might be the toughest one to convey verbally.
And also part of it might be one of the first things that you look at too, I guess, if you think about it, because if you're 6'5", you don't want a bike.
This list isn't necessarily what you look at in this order.
Sure.
I have to agree.
Yeah, it's just the things. It's not things 1, 2, 3, 4 that you look for. It's just all encompassing.
And it might take some experimentation to figure out what size bike actually fits you.
Go to a bike shop and have them fit you to a bike. Then you know what size you are.
Right. And let them know your intent.
Yeah.
Don't lead them on and
go to the big fancy ones.
Let them go to Trek store.
Go to ours is Roll. They'll fit you for free and all that good stuff.
They got a laser fitting. Sure, they'll give you.
Well, all those fit things are based on assumptions, and I think the basic assumptions have changed over the years. I'll digress with something super geeky.
Ooh.
I came across an ad for a Raleigh 3-speed bike from 1919.
Okay.
The men's sized bikes, the men's bikes came in 3 sizes. The diamond frames, we'd call them now. The diamond frame came in 22-inch, 24-inch, and 26-inch.
Oh, wow.
Jeez.
Those are all extremely huge.
They're extremely huge by
today.
Today's standards.
Yeah.
And back then, just to go full circle with this, the average height of a British man was 5'8". So presumably the medium was aimed at the average guy who was 5'8". People would be going bananas here in the local bike community and bike shops. Yet somehow that worked for them. Were they stupid?
So
I think it's
the geometry a little different. Maybe
in comparison, that would be like a 5'8" man would be like on a 17-inch frame safely.
Right. So the geometry was different, but the seat,
they're still measuring the same.
And the bottom brackets were higher. They actually sat up. The bottom brackets were higher off the ground on these particular bikes
to clear the horse poop.
I think you have something there, and the rocks in the middle of the road. So
when you talk about a 22-inch bike or or 56 centimeter bike or whatever the heck it is, they're measuring from the center of the crank or the bottom bracket
Most
to
of the, time, yeah.
the top of the seat tube.
I guess generally
Well,
they are.
of course, it's generally. We can't
Yeah.
go every single. Generally,
The
yes.
fitting is, yeah, like you said, it's a complex.
The guy who owns the bike shop where I work, Ride Home, Chris Anderson, tells a great fit story. He went and had spent money on one of the well-known fit systems. And you're on this like fake bicycle.
Yeah.
And they take measurements of all, your leg bones and your arms and all this stuff and your height. And they move everything around and, there you are.
Perfect.
There you are. And the person fitting him asked, "Are you comfortable?"
Hell no.
And he said, "You tell me."
Is this how
I
it
think
should
that
be
was
feeling?
a perfect response because
Right.
you've done all this supposed science and system.
Gone through that
It
rigmarole.
should be right,
Right.
but it may not be. And
Yeah.
I think
I don't know. I haven't
mean,
ridden
this
this
is
bike
just
yet.
this is just my opinion. I think people are riding way smaller bikes now than people did when I was a kid, when I really started getting into cycling. Way smaller. And that's just how, and somehow people, it works. I guess they're comfortable. I wouldn't be comfortable on a bike that, I bought several years ago a 56 centimeter bike. That was what someone convinced me would fit. And I
How
was
tall are
never
you?
comfortable. I'm 5'9",
Okay.
but I have very long legs.
So
And
I would put you on a 56.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're a customer, that's what
Yeah.
I would. My
Or at least a
go-to would be.
starting point. But I think
Or
that
even a 54. Like, really?
Yeah.
For 5'9".
what I'm going to say is, if are you comfortable when you ride the bike? Does the bike handle well for you? And is there some clearance when you're standing over the bike between your crotch and the top tube?
Yeah, that's
If all
that's a
those
good
things
one.
come together, then you're probably okay.
Except for women's bikes.
And it also
It's hard to
depends
do.
on the configuration of what style of bike it is. So
Yes.
for it's me saying that I would put you on a 54, that's assuming that it's a road bike with drop-down handlebars.
Right.
If it was something with upright
Yep.
type of handlebars, like for me, for instance, I could ride comfortably a 54 up through a 58 on a road bike, depending on what kind of configuration I have with stem and handlebar configuration. So I have an old Bridgestone that's a 58 that has cruiser type bars, city type handlebars. It fits completely fine. I'm very comfortable
Yeah.
on it. And then that bike right there that I have a Surly Crosscheck that's a 56, and that's completely comfortable to me as well. It just depends on the configuration of the different parts.
I hear a lot of people saying, I've got to go back to the fitter. And I think that's great. If it works for you and it's working for you, do the fits and go back to the fitter as you feel you need to. I did a well-known local ride last year that is every May, and I rode with someone who had a professional fit, and her saddle was like 1.5 inches too low.
Oh, wow.
So just do some reading.
That's quite a bit.
You need some good
It doesn't
decent
sound like
leg
much, but that's a lot.
extension. So, it was dramatic.
Yeah.
If you're going to go on long rides, for sure.
Yeah, especially the more, and that's true too. I mean, if you're riding competitively, then it's like obvious you're going to probably, and you're spending $5,000 and up on your bicycle, or someone else is spending $5,000 for your bike if you're sponsored or something.
Right.
Then the fit makes sense. But again, if you're doing errands within a 5-mile radius, which to me is not just as legit, but a really good way to use a bike, maybe it's not as important to have that scientific approach to it, but just use your own common sense about, are you comfortable? Does the bike handle well? Do you feel too stretched out or too cramped with the handlebars too close to you or too far away, too stretched out?
Right.
And unfortunately, if you're new, that might take some time to figure out.
Well,
so
and
it's just part of the game.
comfort is what we're talking about is comfort as you sit on the bike while pedaling, not comfort in accordance to how you're sitting relative to the ground, but relative to where you're pedaling, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it actually it's comfortable when you ride it. Is that what you mean?
Right, and not like some people aren't
Standing
comfortable
over
sitting on a bike
Yeah.
because they can't touch the
Oh
ground.
yeah, right.
So they're just like, well, this bike is too big for me because I can't touch the ground or I'm on my tippy toes, and I'm just like, well, you're the way you sit on the bike and you're pedaling it. That's what we're looking at here.
Yeah.
The efficiency of how you pedal it and the most strength you can get out of your pedal strokes, as opposed to just standing on it. You're going to be spending more time pedaling the bike than you are.
So I think you're right. You started out saying that this would be a difficult subject.
tough,
I think it
yeah.
is. It's not something because
You'll figure it out over time, basically.
You will figure it out over time, and heaven forbid. Here's another thing about used bikes that's pretty good. Let's say you spend $150 or $200 on a used bike. Maybe you put some money in it to get it tuned up. It's probably not going to go down drastically in value.
Yeah,
it's already used.
That's true.
It's not, and so you're not going to lose a lot of money if you go, well, gee, I think this is actually, I've given it a really fair chance, ridden it for a couple of months, and it's just not right for me.
Right.
Post your ad.
Yeah, and we talked about
As
that
long as you
before.
didn't get completely swindled.
Yeah, when you buy even a brand new bike, is the resale value is going to hold. When you buy a Walmart bike, you automatically, people are going to expect to pay $15 for that online when it's new, when it's used. I mean,
Maybe.
yeah. So when you buy a quality bike, you can, whatever money you have into it, most likely you'll get most of it back, especially if it's a fit issue. If you've only had it for a couple months and had some fit problems or whatever. And like Josh said, if you didn't get swindled, but assuming you paid a fair price, you'll get a fair price back, and you won't be out that much. Just a little bit of time, you're a little wiser. You're narrowing down exactly what you want, what you need, and what works for you.
The point about being able to resell something is it's not like one false move and your life is
Right.
ruined. I mean, you want your bike to be safe. If it ends up being the wrong bike, that's not the end of the world. You'll find the right bike, and it's worth doing because it's really fun to ride a bike.
There's one thing that Josh asked Keith prior to recording that I'm curious too, and we want to know. Obviously, your real name is not Keith Lugs. We just kind of want to know, the meaning behind. I'm assuming Keith might be your real first name, but Lugs.
True. This might have been about 20 years ago, I think. I rode with a group of people, and we did a lot of riding together, different kinds of riding, road rides, and I guess early forms of what is now called gravel grinding. And we also commuted together. A lot of them worked downtown, and we would meet downtown and ride north on the Olentangy Trail for part of our commute, and then split off as it went. And we met at a place that ended up getting that name too. They called it Lugs Landing, but they gave me the nickname Lugs because apparently I talked incessantly about lugs.
Yeah.
Or how I liked lugged bikes or something. I mean,
Sure.
I must not have realized it, but
Lugs are important.
They're important. If it's a lugged bike, you want to make sure it really has the lugs. Or It's not going to last long.
Yeah.
So, and I came from an era, started riding in an era when every good bike pretty much was lugged, and I feel nostalgic about that era, definitely. And I think there's still some really good lugged steel bikes being made today, certainly custom bikes. So
Can you name a couple?
it seemed to fit. Oh, new ones?
Yeah.
Oh, J.P. Weigel, the custom maker.
Okay.
Certainly Richard Socks. There's probably more good custom makers in the United States right now than any other time, and it's pretty competitive thing. Rivendell.
Sure.
Sells bikes.
That's a big one.
Waterford Precision.
Yeah.
You couldn't go wrong with a Waterford, lugged or otherwise. I mean, the institutional knowledge of that business goes back, really, if you count all the Schwinns, I mean, generations, but they have within that shop just absolute consummate craftsmen. So
Yeah, check those people out if you want to see some really nice, high-end,
Beautiful
steel bikes.
Beautiful lugs.
Yeah.
So they gave me that nickname, and it stuck.
Yeah.
How long ago?
About 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
Okay.
I think that would have been about the time that lugged bikes were disappearing, and I was probably complaining
Trying
about it.
to hang on to them. Yeah.
Well, so Lugs with an S. You can check him out. Check out his his Facebook page, Cycling for Fun. I want to thank Thomas for being here and putting in all of his his knowledge into this subject.
I hope he has a good
I'm here.
audios for us.
Yeah, we'll look forward to him on the closing here. But we want to thank Keith. I know
welcome. Thanks for having me.
it took a lot of time out of his day. We'll put a link to his article. You can read it. It's a lot less detailed than we went over here, but still a good read. And
I'm sure there's some
notes.
little things in there that we
missed.
missed
There might
too.
be some stuff that we missed and all that good stuff. So thanks for all that, Keith. And we're going to get out of here.
All right.
Over and out. People.
Bye.
Bye.
Aw, English.
Fail.